my grandfather and his father and every ancestor going back had been Hindu priests. And I'd always considered myself to be a fairly religious Hindu. I was strictly vegetarian. I'd never drank alcohol. I would pray, and I would sit up at till the early hours of the morning with my mum, discussing my favorite chapter of the Gita. And I wasn't looking for another religion at all. I mean, I thought I was Hindu, and that was that. Now, for a few months, and by some accounts for many years, a story had been developing.
I can hear you in the back, so speak up.
Inshallah. The story had been developing in France, and they had banned the wearing of overt symbols of religiosity in French schools and in French public buildings, with the primary focus being on the hijab. Now, their argument was that it wasn't really directed at the hijab, rather as any overt symbols of religiosity, including a large cross and so on, but it was fairly obvious to anybody where their focus was. Now, some students at this university that I was attending had organized an event discussing the ramifications of this ban, and I just decided to attend purely out of interest from the news. As I said, I wasn't looking for another religion. The audience were a mixture of Muslims, non-Muslims, and some students from France, because it was a London university, so it's fairly diverse. And they were all unified on wanting to learn more about this political situation. So we all listened to the young Muslim speaker eloquently describe the Islamic position. And I'd already assumed that Muslims would want the ban stopped, but I'd never heard anyone describe it in quite this way. The sisters in France were faced with a choice, the almost unthinkable decision of whether to leave university, to abandon their education, to possibly ruin their lives, all for a piece of cloth. And yet somehow some of those sisters decided to wear the hijab despite the very likely consequences. This sacrifice and this struggle really struck me. I wanted to know what motivated them to do what seemed unimaginable, to make the active decision to give up on what the whole of society was expecting of them, to give up on what seemed like the most practical option, and instead to choose the hijab. So after this talk I had attended, I arranged to meet one of the brothers there who was at the same talk and to find out more. I just wanted to understand what was it, out of curiosity. Honestly, I was just curious to find out and to try and get some answers to some of my questions. I didn't know it at the time, but the person, alhamdulillah, the person I was going to meet would literally change my life and the way I view everything in it. So this brother's name is Majid, and he explained the basis of Islam, the proof of Allah's existence, and the message of the Quran. And I remember coming home and telling my mum, guess what? Somebody just proved to me that God exists. And my mum was, bear in mind, we're a religious family. My mum was shocked. She said, proof, really? And she was clearly surprised. And subhanAllah. So, I mean, just think about what this was. We thought we understood. I didn't think I needed proof. I thought, I'm religious and I know for sure already. Whereas the reality is there is a proof and you can know it. So this brother Majid, he had proved to me that the Creator exists, the same way that you know that you exist and the chairs underneath you exist. Definite proof. And he went on to prove that the Quran is the literal word of this Creator. And it was a proof like nothing I had ever experienced. Although it was emotive, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't based on blind faith. It wasn't even because the Quran contains proven predictions or amazing details of science. It was definite, rational, proven fact. And what's more, alhamdulillah, I could prove it too. So I discussed all of this at home, and I want you to bear in mind again that my family was already considered to be amongst the most religious, with his generations of priests. And yet it was a complete surprise to my mum. And it was only at the very end of this conversation where there was a long pause, and I said to her, don't you see what this means? And in disbelief, my mum suddenly kind of took a step back and said, wait, you're not going to become Muslim, are you? And I gave the almost rhetorical response that faced with an undeniable proof, how could I not become Muslim? And subhanAllah, I mean, it was a difficult time for my family. I remember it being very kind of tense and stressful for them all, subhanAllah. It was, it felt like a test, subhanAllah. And this proof, this same proof that had motivated me was the reason, the motivation for those sisters with the hijab in France. This same proof was the thing that gave them clarity and certainty, especially when they felt like they were being tested. Can I? Can't I? Should I? Shouldn't I? And this proof was tipping the balance. So with a small gathering of brothers, a couple of days later, I slowly said the words, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And that was followed by a chorus of takbirs and hugs and handshakes and Allahu Akbar.